Welcome to Bridging the Generation Gap. I'm Joyce Zohar, and I'm from the silent generation.
And I'm Karen Zohar, and I'm from Gen X. Joyce, we've known each other for quite a while, haven't we?
We certainly have, Karen. I've known you since you were born.
That's right.
You are my daughter.
You are my mother.
Yes, and we represent a generation gap. What is a generation gap? Well, people born in different eras have different values, different behaviors, different points of reference, and this often leads to conflict between generations. It can be friction, it can be irritation and annoyance, it can be downright anger, and lead to familial problems. So we're hoping that by these series of discussions, you can see how Karen and I have attempted to bridge that generation gap and come to perhaps a patient understanding of each other and where we're coming from.
I agree, Mom, and I feel like we've gone through different stages of our relationship, and we're actually in a really good place right now.
Yes, we are. It took a while, but we're here. Karen, do you know what the sandwich generation is?
The generation that likes to eat sandwiches?
Well, that's one definition. No, I'm thinking of something else, Karen. I'm thinking of people like you, people who have responsibilities to somebody who's older, namely me, but also to somebody who's younger than you, your children, for example. You consider yourself an Oreo sandwich and you're the cream in the middle. You have to stick to both sides.
Well, that's true because you are an octogenarian, if it's okay with me saying so.
I guess you can say that, yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I think you're in incredible shape, both physically and cognitively. But that being said, as we get older and we age, certain issues may come up that it might be helpful to have a family member around to help with. So I am happy to do that with you, Mom. I also have to keep an eye on my children and what's going on with them. I have two children who are currently in their 20s. So I guess that does make me a sandwich generation because I'm focusing both on the generation older than me as well as the generation younger than me.
Yes, and you know, a sandwich person doesn't necessarily have to span our age groups. You could be a younger woman with very young children and parents who are in their 50s or 60s. Perhaps the parents are facing some financial difficulty. Maybe there's discontent in a marriage. That happens sometimes after many years. And you become an emotional support for your parents. Meanwhile, you're dealing with very young children who need your attention. So you can be a sandwich generation anywhere along the spectrum.
I agree, and I think sometimes that can be challenging for people like me. I do want to mention, though, that it's not just women or mothers, it's also men who can have many challenges and struggles trying to juggle situations both with parents and children. I think it's equally as stressful.
Absolutely, I agree with you, and perhaps they feel a different burden, but just as heavy a burden from the financial viewpoint. I'd like to explore a little bit more the sandwich generation that we encompass. Because, yes, it's true, I consider myself in pretty good shape for my age, but I recognize that things are happening. I'm slowing down physically, maybe even a little bit cognitively. I'm still very independent, and I want to be independent, but I have friends who are my contemporaries who perhaps have deteriorated a little more than I have at this point, and I can see what a difficult situation they're in. They want their independence, but maybe they can't quite cope with all of that, and they don't want to cede control over to their kids. The kids, on the other hand, are very busy with their own generational issues, And perhaps they're not prepared or equipped to deal with the additional burden of their parents. I'd like your viewpoint, being the one in the middle, about what are the pressures that you feel?
Well, I think it's challenging for someone in the sandwich generation to reconcile all of these things. I know that one of the issues that many families struggle with are things like whether or not the middle generation should have, let's say, medical power of attorney or in general power of attorney, because sometimes things can happen with the older generation very, very quickly.
Yes.
So I guess I think to some degree, the question is for each family, how much do they want to plan in advance and manage potential issues versus dealing with the day-to-day stuff?
You know, Karen, that's a very sensitive thing for people my age. You know, we know where we are, but we don't really want to know where we are.
Okay.
We want to think of ourselves as 20 years younger. We want to think of ourselves as completely independent. We don't want to cede any authority because that's a recognition to us that maybe we're closer to the end than we want to recognize. And there's a fear element involved in that. So it becomes a very emotional issue for my generation. You know, maybe it makes a lot of sense for you to say, Mom, here's a power of attorney, sign this over, even if I have complete trust in you. Or here's a medical power of attorney, which is even more sensitive, you know. But I am reluctant to cede that authority. It means to me that I'm admitting where I am in life, and maybe I don't want to recognize this. Can you understand why I postpone these discussions every time you bring them up?
I really do understand that, Mom. And what I'm hearing you say is that if you don't want to cede power or control under a specific circumstance, it may have nothing to do with me or nothing to do with the child. You may trust the child implicitly. It's really more about how you feel, and you're trying to reconcile moving forward in your life. And one of the things that makes you feel good is having as much control and autonomy over your life as possible.
Yes. Let me give you some examples from some friends that I have. I have one woman my age, actually she's a little older, who lost her husband. She's been a widow for many years. But she had a companion. She and a gentleman friend were very close. They never married, but they were very close for more than 20 years after her husband had passed. And she became very dependent upon him. Well, he passed away about 4 or 5 years ago. And she has been living a miserable existence ever since because she was so dependent upon him to take care of finances, to fix little things around the house. I mean, to go to the grocery market and pick up a container of milk. She's having a lot of medical issues now. She isn't as mobile as she was, and she's having a very difficult time coping. Okay, step in her daughter, who lives in another state. Mom, come to us. You don't have to live with us. We'll find you an apartment nearby. I mean, it's a perfectly logical solution. Sounds good. The daughter's willing. She won't move. She will not consider this option. Now, what do I say to her? Now, the daughter is pressing her, and I understand it. What should the daughter do?
Oh, that's a tough one. I understand why someone doesn't want to move out of a space that they may have lived in for 20, 30, even 40 years. It's grounding to them. It's foundational to them. It's really all they know on a day-to-day basis. And moving to another state could be very disorienting and quite frankly may cause some depression and anxiety. So I do understand it. And I think that this is more of a problem now than it has been in the past, say 40 or 50 years ago, when we were living much more in multi-generational households, where you'd have a home and you'd have a family with the parents and the children, and the grandparents lived there too. And it was a natural sequence that the grandparents helped out with the children, the parents would work.
Right.
But now we have so many people living in different cities, living in different states. Sure, some of the ways that we connect have gotten better because we can video call each other and do things like that. But when someone needs help shopping, when someone needs help going to the doctor's office, when someone needs help around the house, it's very difficult for a child of my generation to help a parent that lives in another state and does not want to move.
Well, yeah. Would you consider moving to her? That's what she thinks is the solution.
Well, you know, in our case, with you and I, that is something that happened. I lived in a different state, and my youngest went off to college, and I decided that it was time to leave where I was and move closer to you. But, you know, there were a lot of personal circumstances around that made it work that may not work for many, many other people. I was a teacher and I was reaching retirement, so I didn't have to worry about switching jobs. Yeah,
my friend's daughter, actually, she and her husband have a business. It's a family business. They spend a lot of time running that business, and they couldn't just pick up and bring it to where she is.
Right.
But she doesn't understand that. She thinks that the obligation is to her, not to the business.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And, you know, people that have certain tools and resources maybe can hire home health aides or caregivers to come help them, but most people are not in that circumstance where they have extra money lying around to be able to have a proxy care for aging parents in a different state.
You know, Karen, that brings up another aspect of the generational sandwich, and that's financial obligation. It can work both ways. You can have an older generation that maybe through inheritance and having owned real estate for a long period of time or whatever, may have accumulated assets. And they look at the younger generation struggling, especially these days. Even the third generation, the grandchildren, can't afford to buy a place anymore. And they have to move away. You talked about why people have dispersed because of economics. They can't afford to live in a certain place. Should the older people think of the assets as no longer belonging to them, but now belonging to the kids, and help them out more?
I think that's a very personal decision for people to consider with their own family dynamics. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that. But what I would say is if someone who's, let's say, reaching the higher years of their life is struggling a bit, I wouldn't worry about saving the money for inheritance for the next kids. I would use it to take care of yourself.
Well, yeah, but you know, my generation, we were raised to be very independent and, well, also to be very nurturing. And it's, you know, you're always the child, even if the child is 65 years old. And if that child or the grandchild is struggling, you want to help them. You still feel an obligation to do it. I honestly think it's a very personal issue, and I'm not sure myself what we should do. Okay, Karen, you know, I agree that it's a very personal thing. I also look at it the other way. Sometimes you have very successful children who want to take care of a parent. They may want to put them in an assisted living. Oh, that's a whole thing, putting them in an assisted living. And I'll get to that in a minute. But they may want to help their parents financially. And our generation is just not comfortable accepting help from our children. We still feel responsible for our children. So I know situations where the children have been very successful, and they want to hire help for the family, for the older generation. Maybe it's a widowed father, for example. It's not always a woman. Particularly the men that I know are very, very reluctant to accept help from their children. They somehow consider it an affront to their manhood because that's the way they were raised. They're responsible. And if you take care of them, it's a sign of weakness to them. So, you know, the whole issue of giving financial help in either direction becomes very sensitive. Do you have any suggestions to perhaps some ways we can talk about that with each other before it becomes a necessity?
Well, I think one of the things that we can all turn to is what we're doing right now, is having a calm, clear-headed conversation about these types of things that's not emotionally charged. That
try that happening. Yeah.
I know. It's very difficult sometimes for family members to communicate with each other without triggering each other. Yes. I think we've experienced that sometimes, but then I have to remember that the reason we may trigger each other is because we care about each other so much. We don't have these issues with other people. It's because we're so close and because we care about the other person that I think we have a heightened sensitivity. Now, that doesn't solve the problem, but I think it helps us understand a little bit what needs to be done to promote successful and productive conversations about these issues.
Well, I'm thinking of about one issue in particular that I see among some of my friends, and that is whether or not to go into an assisted living facility. I have friends who definitely need it. They cannot really function well anymore on their own. There are financial resources available in the family for them, and that's not true for most people, but for some people it is. And still they refuse to do it because they don't want to give up autonomy. And this is a major issue, and usually those discussions don't happen until the issue presents itself as immediate. Maybe people have to talk about this in advance. What would you do? Would you be willing to cede some of that authority to the child and let them make the decision for you?
I completely agree with that. These are big decisions that are going to be life-changing. And maybe one way to approach it is to break it down into some smaller steps. For example, before things get, let's say, really tense, or someone is less able to take care of themselves to the point where it's really concerning, maybe the adult child and the aging parent can go look at assisted living homes together and just get a feel for them. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I was doing that with you, one thing I would say is, listen, Mom, let's go take a look. We absolutely are not doing it at this time. We're not going to trick you into staying there. You have complete control over it. You're welcome to go there and say, I don't like this. I don't want to do this. I need to hear that. But would you do me a favor and just come see a couple places with me? How would you respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you, it would be difficult for me to do it, because I don't want to go. So, right away, that's off the table for me as an option. Now, that's my personal emotional response. My rational response is, this is a reasonable proposal. I should have options available, and I should look at those options when I'm in a position where I'm not under pressure. But emotionally, I don't feel that way.
It's that classic dichotomy between what the head wants and what the heart wants. And I think in this circumstance, the adult child is thinking more logically and is thinking with their head, whereas the aging parent is really being driven by their emotions and their feelings about things, and that is incredibly valid too.
Yes, maybe I'm being driven by emotions, but you know, one thing that happened to me as I got older is I found I was in touch with my emotions more than I've ever been before. When I was a parent, when I was in the business world, and I worked for many years, as you know, I learned to suppress my emotions. You know, you have to get up and go to work every day. You have to deal with all kinds of people and situations, and so you learn how to repress emotions. And that carries over into your personal life. At least it did for me. And all of a sudden now, those barriers have been lifted. And I find that I'm more emotional than I've ever been before. And I think that may be typical of people my age. I don't know if it has to do with the aging brain or just the reduction in the necessity to keep things under wraps. I don't know what the mechanism is, but I see that it's true. And so I'm exposing emotions to you that maybe you've never seen before.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's something that people of my generation come across quite a bit, is that parents start acting differently than what they're used to. Their personalities may change a little bit. They may be extra sensitive to things that they weren't. They may be stubborn about things that were fine in the past. It's hard. It's hard to know what to do in that situation. Do you have any suggestions?
I'm glad you recognize that this can happen, because I think younger people think of their parents as monolithic, you know, that they've always been the same way. But as you get older, things change. And maybe you don't change radically, but maybe what happens is you become even more entrenched in your own personality. Mm-hmm. If you were on the stubborn side before, you become really stubborn. If you were fearful or felt vulnerable before, or needy, as some people call it, well, you get even needier. And you feel more vulnerable. And you want to depend more and more on those people that you depended on before. I see that happening among my friends. I think people your age have to understand that this is a dynamic thing, and you can't treat us the way you did when you were younger and we were younger.
That's fair. I understand that, and a certain word is coming to mind, which is ossification.
Oh my goodness, what's that?
Which basically means that the person is becoming more rigid, set in their ways, and less flexible.
Yes, I see that. Well, you know, as we talked about earlier with my friend who refuses to move, it's also a comfort thing. It's a familiarity thing. It's the decreasing ability to deal with novelty and newness. You know, people my age have a difficult time adjusting to new technology. It takes us a lot longer to learn to do things. And maybe we were very quick learners in the past, so we don't like that feeling. So we kind of hide that, reject it. It adds to some of the angst that we feel. And maybe we do feel more angst. You have to recognize that. I don't know how to describe it, but we just don't want to give up autonomy.
But let me ask you this. What if, as your child, I notice that your driving has gotten to the point where it's dangerous?
Oh dear. Oh dear. Well, this is a very sensitive issue, taking away my driving. You know, we define ourselves by where we can go and what we can do on our own. And if you take away my driving, how am I going to get around? I'll be even more dependent on you.
Let's be clear about something. A child cannot take away a parent's driving abilities. That's not legal, unless, let's say, they actually have power of attorney and want to take the car keys away because they have control of the car. But for most families, children might ask the parent to stop driving, but I think you're right. They're not going to want to, and they're going to resist it. And I think it's difficult for both sides, because we're worrying constantly about you that not only might you hurt yourself, but you might hurt someone else.
This is true. This is true. I've had some near misses recently that I haven't told you about. Yes.
You know, there are new here in Laguna Woods. We have an extensive bus system that takes us to the supermarket, takes us to medical appointments, takes us on field trips. We also have Uber now and the traditional taxis, and seniors have a special program to get discounted taxis. So there are resources available that are kind of in the middle that would allow you to be mobile and autonomous without you actually driving the car.
Yes, I know. I know it up here. I don't know it here yet. I have to really accept this idea. But I think you're right. There are resources available. I just didn't want to recognize them. And I have a friend in her 90s who voluntarily not so voluntarily, she has macular degeneration, so she kind of had to give up her car keys. But she did it not reluctantly. And she relies on Uber, and she relies on these services. And now I look at her and I see maybe that's a role model. And I shouldn't be so fearful. Fear is at the bottom of all of this, Karen. I shouldn't be so fearful about having to do things on my own.
Well, I think that brings us to sort of the crux of what's going on, the core question, which is, what do you do in a family when parent and child have very different opinions on how to solve a specific problem, and they're not close on it? They're very far away from it.
Well, yeah, sitting down and talking about it is a good start. And maybe that defines how far apart the generation gap is. And then maybe both sides have to yield a little bit. And I think it's going to be harder for the older parent to yield because, as you said, what's the word? Ossification? We're a little bit ossified, and we're a lot more fearful.
You know, and for my generation, I think one thing we can do is to try to be really positive with you and try to let you know that we're not trying to take away your autonomy. It's just because we care about you that we're making suggestions.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about, Karen. And I hope you out there have had an opportunity to listen to this discussion and perhaps have it with your own families. On behalf of Karen and myself, this is Bridging the Generation Gap.
Thank you for joining us, and we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments, we can be reached at lagunawoodsgenerationgap@gmail.com.